access to the tender documents and the various components on PCS tender system that you'll need to be aware of in order to bid properly. I think we'll probably have a bit of a mixed audience. I've been having a look at some of the companies who've registered, so for some of you, hopefully this will be fairly familiar, but feel free as we're going through just to ask any questions through the chat as well. The reason we're doing it primarily on slides is that this will give you something afterwards as a reference so that you don't need to take notes as well as we're going through. Okay, so initially Public Contract Scotland is the first portal, and I think a lot of you might already be aware of this. This is where all the opportunities are advertised, and I'm hoping that all of you are registered, but if you're not, just very quickly, it's a free of charge service, and this is where legally every Scottish public body has to publish the notices of a value over a certain threshold. So for this type of service, this would be anything over £50,000. PCS looks like this. You can register at the top, and we would need to register as a supplier. Just to let you know, there's a more general course on this, on how to use PCS. So if you're looking for other opportunities, want to do some market research, I'd encourage you to use the SDP events calendar as well, and you'll get some perhaps broader advice. Today the training's entirely about the FLS opportunity. So you either log in at this stage or you can register if you've not registered before. The registration's fairly straightforward. Always equate it a little bit to registering for any online shopping or most of the other things that we get involved in for registration. A couple of slightly odd ones. There's a NUTS code where you have to select a region, and you are asked if you're third sector, but I think in this particular type of contract and sector that we're in, that probably doesn't apply. So finding the FLS contract, initially probably it's a good idea to find it on Public Contracts Scotland first, and I would normally do that by using search for buyer and click on that. This is on when you log in, is on your kind of home page that you come into. Type in forestry and land and search, and it'll come up with the link through to what we call the buyer profile. Every public body on PCS has one of these profiles, and it looks like this. So you'd be looking for the current contract notices tab. I think possibly there might have been some what we call prior information notices published, so they tend to be under this future one. But you can obviously, if you're interested, if you've not dealt with FLS before, have a look at some of the past contracts, and in particular you can look at the contract awards as well. But at this stage we're looking at current contract notices, and you can see it comes up here as a link. And this little icon, strange icon here on the left with the arrow, tells you that we're not going to get the documents on Public Contract Scotland. We're going to need to move to PCS tender. So if you click on this one, you'll then come to what we would call the contract notice. And immediately, obviously this is just an extract that I've taken just now, you can see some tabs at the top. If it was on PCS, you'd be asked to register an interest, but you don't do that here. You've got to go through to the PCS tender, and this is what the blue box tells you. This is what needs to be done. I still would tend to read through the full notice text beforehand, because if you're still, I don't know, maybe deciding whether to bid or not, the full notice can already give you a bit of an overview of what's involved. And sometimes that's quite helpful before you go to the trouble to actually move to the other site and register there. So you get the link to PCS tender, but before you move across to that, you need to take a note of this project code here, which is 25860. And the reason for that is once we move over to PCS tender, it's going to bring us into a list of every single tender open at the moment for bidding, and it can be quite difficult to work your way through to find the forestry and land ones. So the project code is what you would normally use, and I'll show you shortly what that looks like. So at this point, as soon as you click that link, you're going to come out of PCS and onto what is a completely different website and portal called PCS Tender. A bit confusing because they obviously sound very similar, not very imaginative. But the reason that they have the two, and we get asked this a lot, is that PCS, Public Contract Scotland, was set up primarily back in 2018 as a means of advertising tenders. The PCS tender website is a much more sophisticated system that's used by the Scottish Government, but also now really quite a lot. It used to be just the larger, maybe councils, larger procurement bodies, but it's much more widely used because it has different functionality for the buyers. So the buyers can do their evaluations through PCS tender. They can run contract management. Louise talked about this request for documentation, for example. So that's the rationale, if you like, between having two almost parallel systems. So click on the PCS tender website link. Yep, sticky slides today. And as I say, the PCS tender, this is the national, it's e-tendering service, but it is a much wider kind of e-procurement system, if you like. And importantly, the PCS tender site includes what Louise referred to earlier, the single procurement document. So we're going to talk a bit about that once we look at the actual tender. This, for those of you who've been bidding for a while, probably we used to know it as a PQQ, a pre-qualification questionnaire. Then with some of the reforms in Scottish procurement, it became the European single procurement document. And then with Brexit, it's now the single procurement document. But all it is really is a process in bidding. It's a stage one of bidding where you tell the buyer, are you eligible to go forward to actually submit your tender? So it's all about your organisation as it stands just now, maybe the people you've got and so on. So we'll have a wee look at that, but it's sometimes referred to as the backward looking bit of the tender, whereas the next stage, the invitation to tender, is very much how will you do the job. And in procurement, they're very much two separate processes. So if you're on to PCS tender, if you haven't registered already, there's a link here, register as a supplier. You'll go through quite a similar process really to what you would do for PCS. If you've already registered, then at this point you would just log in with your username and password. Registration, very little. I think at this point you get to choose your username. Quite a lot of people maybe just use your password. There's a couple of very basic questions about your turnover and employee range, but other than that, you get fairly quickly through to the registration, and then you get sent a temporary password, which you can then choose and adapt your own. Okay, so hopefully, I'm sorry that's a bit fast for anyone that's not got through the process, but fairly straightforward if you've not registered, in particular for the PCS tender, where this is where the tender is going to be administered. Once you've logged in, you come to this home page, and it's this part here, the projects, where you're going to click on ITTs, which stands for Invitation to Tenders. And that's what's going to take you into a page called, and you'll see at the top tab here, ITTs open to all suppliers. And at this point, you'll get this at the top. Underneath that would be just really maybe 3, 4, sometimes more pages with just listings of different tenders. And for some reason, I don't know why, there isn't anything at this point that tells you who the tender, who the buyer is, and that's what makes it difficult to find the one you're looking for. So when you arrive here on this open to all suppliers one, you need to click on this downward arrow box, choose the project code option, and then click in here, this box, the operator box has a big list of things, choose contains, and then type in the value, the number that we spotted on PCS. And then there's another box on the right called search. And at that point, it's going to go through those documents and it's going to come up with a list of, it's going to look a little bit similar to this, which is a list of all the tenders. Now, at this point, you're going to get, you can only see a few of the lots listed here on the slide, but you will also need to watch for what they call a master ITT link. And once you've clicked the master and go through, you can actually still get access to all these lots. You don't necessarily need to come back. But at this stage, in fact, you can really click on any of the ones and it will then put it into what we would call the My ITTs section. And that's where you can start to get into some of the questions. As Louise said, you can only choose a maximum of 3 lots. So at this point, you probably want to maybe even just choose one just now to sort of get into the documents and have a look and then go back and choose the others. Anything in blue here, by the way, that you see is the live link to open these up. There's a bit of a funny thing goes on with PCS tenders. So quite often at these early stages, when you open up some of the ITTs, you've got to watch out for a box towards the top. This says express an interest. I think as well there's another one called intend to respond. And if you don't click those, it won't actually open up all the boxes with the questions. So watch out for that. It's a little bit of an oddity in the system. Okay, so hopefully you can get through that stage, you can put in your code, you can find what we would call the master ITTs, and you can find some individual lots, which is where you want to do the pricing. And you'll come through to a page here, which is this master ITT one, and then underneath it you've got the various buttons, if you like, that are part of the PCS tender system. So in the master ITT, you've got 2 different sections. You've got the qualification response, which we've talked about, this single procurement document, and you've got the technical response. And as Louise said, you fill in these regardless of what lots. You don't need to fill them in 3 different times if you've bid for 3 lots, which is good news. Some tenders make you do all these separately. So each of these are a live link that will take you through to the qualification. And at any stage as you're going through this, you can open these up, take a look, exit the system, come back in and out, all the way right up to the submission. So it's not one of these systems where you have to come in and fill in absolutely everything. You get plenty of time to move around the system and come back out again. We're going to come back and talk separately about these attachments and the messages system, but obviously this is what, under the ITT details, these are already the sort of things you see, and this is my response, is this part here. Hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer once we're seeing it quickly online. So I've represented the qualification response here as a diagram because when you see it on the online system, it's quite daunting. It is literally just pages and pages and pages of questions. But if you understand how it's structured, you can actually see that it's not quite as difficult as it might look on the screen to fill in. So there'll be a part 1, which is information about forestry and land. We don't need to fill in anything there. But part 2 is where we'll start to fill in some basic information about our organisation. And importantly, there's an element in part 2 that asks if you're either subcontracting, or this funny terminology, are you relying on other entities? I think probably for most of you, it might be a subcontracting situation. So I'm thinking particularly if you're bidding for 3 lots rather than 1 or 2, you might be teaming up, so to speak. with other providers. There might be a question, Louise and Daniel, I know it's come up with previous FLS ones, whether, you know, if you've got maybe freelance type drivers, do they count as subcontractors or are they part of the employment? But in part 2 is where you would describe these, and you will find if you do list a subcontractor or what I would call a partner, you'll be asked, and there'll be a little box triangle like this that says that they need to fill in an SPD as well. So we can maybe talk about that in the Q&A later on if that's the situation that you think you might be in. Part 3 is a very lengthy, we call them the yes-no questions, and it's all about business probity, and it's as extreme as are you involved in terrorist activities at one end of the scale, to things about, you know, are you in administration? So largely the answers are all no, they're all pass-fail, and there's a couple tucked in the middle hidden away about paying taxes and social security, which have to be yes. But those are, although it looks daunting, again, that can be filled in fairly quickly. The important part, and this is really where the pass-fail elements come to the fore more than anything, is this part 4, what we call the selection criteria. And if you don't pass the selection criteria, anything that you've filled in the technical scores, any of your prices, probably won't even be looked at if you're excluded at this stage. So it is very important. So I've put in the boxes here what you'll actually see on this FLS tender in section 4. So there's some questions on different licenses that you might have, certificates, is there a pollution kit in the vehicles? There's guidance at the top of each of the questions which tells you exactly what FLS are looking for. They've done that, you have to make sure you read that because the questions in the SPD are absolutely standard across largely the whole of the UK, if not Europe. So some of the wording in the questions isn't necessarily the question that FLS wants you to fill in, if you know what I mean. So be sure that you actually understand and read that guidance at the top of each question. There will be questions about insurance, and the insurance levels will be given to you. And then there's a series of questions about technical and professional ability. The first one of these is the 3 example projects, and within those 3 projects you're given about half a dozen sort of subheadings that FLS wants you to fill in for each one. I think it will be between as well, maybe similar projects within the last 3 years, but maybe Daniel and Louise would tell me if it's 3 or 5 in this case. Questions on supply chain management. So how do you track your supply chain? And in particular, you need to make commitments about prompt payment, which is a Scottish Government policy that all tenders must reflect now. You'll be asked some very specific questions, even at this stage. Stage 1 about environmental measures, including do you have a carbon reduction plan? Again, there's detailed description there of what's needed. Some questions on manpower, just generally numbers over the last 3 years, maybe split into different categories, management, non-management, and an opportunity in 4C9 to give a list of plant and equipment. Watch out on that one as well. That's not just vehicles. It could be, you know, what in-vehicle equipment have you got? What communication systems do you use? Lone working trackers, I don't know, maybe less relevant for this, possibly not. Pollution kits being mentioned somewhere else. So think a bit wider. It's not just the kind of bigger equipment necessarily that needs to go in there. And then section 4D, I think in this one, it's just the health and safety management system. But typically you might be asked about quality policies and environmental policies here as well. If you don't have ISO or a recognised externally audited system or policy, then you still get the opportunity to say what you do internally. And it's this kind of evidence, if you like, that's particularly the sort of evidence that FLS will ask for after the tender has been submitted at the next stage. Okay, so that's the qualification part. As I say, it looks quite daunting on the screen, but I think it's one that you could probably get into fairly quickly and get completed as soon as you can. And that's under the Master ITT part of the tender. When we come to the technical questions, there's a set of questions which we'll look at just very quickly when we're online. But typically, these may give you a character box, a bit like this, where you've got 2,000 characters to fill in the answer. Or you might be asked to attach a file. In some cases, that might be your own template, just a Word document. Remember to put your name on the documents when you do that. Or you might find, again, one of these alert triangles, which means there's maybe a template to fill in. The project examples in that qualification section, for example, will have a template that you have to use. Okay, so the format in the technical questions will all be numbered, and this little red asterisk, if you see it on the screen as well, means that it's mandatory. So if you don't answer the question, the system won't let you submit once you've completed. So when you come away from the Master ITT and click on, let's just say lot 1 is the one that I've looked at in the last few days. There is a box called Technical Response, but in fact, all that is a question that says, have you filled in the Master ITT in full? And you just say yes, and then all that's left then is to fill in this commercial response here. So it's not another list of questions, you'll be glad to hear at this point. Just quickly on those technical questions, obviously we won't be looking at advice specifically on how to answer the actual questions here, but I would say in general, just the way that these scored questions go, they're usually reasonably demanding. You know, they're asking how will you be doing things, you know, what's involved, what's your approach. So it's hugely important that you try and plan your response before you start answering the question, to make sure that you answer, in particular, all the points for each question. To be honest, I sometimes just even do this handwritten to start with, but then I'll be working with our bid team or our clients just to make sure that we've actually answered every single part of the question. It's probably the commonest way that people have lost tenders, is that they've failed to answer questions in full. If you're given a word limit, you must keep to it. Again, if there's a sort of minimum font size, please stick to that as well. And don't cross-reference, so don't say, please see our answer to question 1 if you feel it's been duplicated. I think looking at the FLS question, there doesn't seem to be much duplication inherent in those, but we have seen some tenders where it feels like the buyer's asking the same thing 3 times over. So don't cross-refer, make sure you duplicate if you have to in the answers. And don't include any web links. Those won't be looked at and they won't be assessed in your response. And if you do attach documents, make sure that you put a proper heading in with the reference number to the contract and your company name as well, just so that can be traced back. So aside from then the actual response areas, the My Response part, that qualification and technical, when you're in this Master ITT, you also get a link through to buyer attachments. And that's hugely important, although in what we've presented just now, we've kind of jumped straight into the responses. We would always recommend that you read all the attachments first before you even start to fill anything in, tempting though that is to just get started. And also, again, to be honest, I would look at any messages that had come through, probably even before necessarily I read the attachments as well, so I can get an idea of, I don't know, things might change, buyer might come back with sort of altered documents, or there might be more clarification in section that's not been clear. This multi-lot ITT tab at any stage will give you the link to the master, but also the links to all the lots that you've expressed an interest in as well. So that's, once you've started going through things, that's the tab to take you across all the tender. And if you have one or two users, rather than sharing your password, it's probably a good idea to set up some additional users. And it doesn't risk somebody, if you're both in at the same time, the system can crash, or worse still, it might overwrite somebody's answers with something else as well. The buyer attachments, so in this case, for the FLS opportunity here, you've got 13. So that's a reasonable amount. So that's already quite a lot of reading to be done before you even start. And when you click on this link here, that's going to open up all the different files. They've got a note here as well, obviously, about the specification KPIs, which Louise covered, and other schedules are in the terms and conditions document. So there'll be a mass download box up on the right. So that's the best way to start. Get them all downloaded onto your laptop and then have a proper read through. This supplier response guide is how to use PCS Tender. So it's produced by the Bravo Solutions people, the software people. So quite generic. It's not going to help particularly with this actual tender, but it can give you background information. So that's buyer attachments. And then you've got your messaging system, which again is another tab. So basically any questions that you have now, even if you've been working with FLS for however long, and you're used to just picking up the phone or emailing direct to someone, in this case now you absolutely must only go through the portal to submit your questions. The questions are anonymised to the extent that when the answers go out, everyone else will see them, but unless you've named yourself in the question, that shouldn't be visible. However, FLS can see who is asking questions, so they'll see it's you. So again, I think there are opportunities if there's something particularly commercially sensitive, you may want to ask that and ask them not to necessarily put that, repeat that out to everyone or to anonymise it somehow. Okay, and please don't be frightened to ask questions. I think I've put a question in already myself about things that wasn't clear to me in one of the qualification, in fact, two questions on the qualification section. It's people sometimes feel like it's kind of like a black mark, or you know, people might view you negatively, but I think, to be honest, it's actually the opposite. It's a much better way to show that you've properly read all the documents. And the tenders are quite complicated. There are lots of documents, so it's not unusual that there are perhaps documents missed or references to old tenders left in that are a bit confusing. So get clarity as much as you can. And Louise, I think, mentioned, I think it's the 27th of February. I should have taken a note of that, but there is a deadline for asking questions as well that you need to adhere to. Okay, I've left in some files here about how to attach a file. I am just going to click through them quickly, but just to let you know that you can use these if this is something that you're not familiar with, but I won't take up our time just now on that particularly, but obviously it's something that's useful. The other thing at the top of the screen, so all the time that you're filling in these documents, you'll get the buttons to save changes and then save and exit. And save changes is quite crucial, particularly as you're working your way, maybe in the qualification one, going around these long lists, because if you sit, I think it's about 15 or 20 minutes, and don't make any changes on the screen goes into lockdown mode or close down mode, and you would lose all your work. So as you're going through, as soon as you've filled in a reasonable amount, click on Save Changes here. Annoyingly, it now brings you back up to the top of the section, which it didn't used to do, but you then just have to scroll back down to where you were. Save and exit will take you out of whichever of these, they sometimes call them envelopes, qualification, technical or commercial, and that would take you back to the My Response summary page. And there's a validate response, And that would check if you've completed all of these mandatory ones that have the asterisk as well. So all being well, if you've filled in absolutely everything, if you've double checked it, I tend to go through a final stage, which is at the top of the form. There's these funny little 3 dots that are not quite so visible, but there's an option there then to do a printable view or a PDF of the response. I do this, to be honest, at the beginning of reviewing a tender before I've even started, because quite often I need to share the documents, and it's quite a nice way to share it without having everybody logging in all at the same time. But it's also a good way, once you've finished, you can produce a PDF and it will show you all your answers in the different boxes, and it will also show you where you've uploaded a file, and you can just double check that that's all been attached properly. And then at that point, you're ready to submit your response. If you submit and you're still in plenty of time before the deadline and you want to change or tweak something, suddenly remembered, or you've got some new information, you just log back in again, reopen the questionnaire, make your changes, and there's a button called Save Changes, or I think it's Save or Keep Changes, and then you just click on Submit again, and it'll update your submission log with the date and the time. There is an opportunity for the whole questionnaire to be filled in Excel, so you can do that right at the beginning of the process. Personally, I don't use it. I think it's simple enough to put directly into the forms, and I feel it's more flexible, and you don't face any issues when you try and upload your Excel to populate the form at the end, just in case something's not matching. And there is technical support, so anything at all to do with the system, not the content or the tender itself, but any glitches, buttons that don't work, things like that for PCS, but particularly for PCS tender, there's phone numbers as well as links as well. I find the phone help desks actually really useful. Okay, so obviously on the slides, that's a wee bit less user-friendly, but the slides are going to be there for you. If you've not done this before, then you will be able to use that. Okay, so I'm not going to go into PCS because I think that's an area where you're probably thinking. I'm just going to double check, Fran, that you can still see my screen okay?
Yes, we're on Public Contract Scotland tender now.
Great. So PCS tender, click on ITTs, just assuming, let's see, my session has expired. Try again. Okay, so this has brought me into my ITTs. The ITT is open to all suppliers, sorry, that's where I am. And this is this filter box where you can choose the project code and then contains. I think if I put the number in here, I won't get it because I've already downloaded it, but I'll just choose this one here at the top just to show you how that works. So it's picked off this top one, and then you click on, and then at this point, you'll have a box at the top to express an interest. And there's also your printable view. Okay, so that I'll not go through that process, obviously, for this other one, but that would get you the master ITT from that list of ITTs open to all suppliers. I'm just going to go into my ITTs. As you can see, I'm working on quite a lot just now, but here's the master one. So that's what that would look like. And there's that project code 25860. So if I click into the master, before any of this opens up, I would have had a little button at the top that says intend to respond. So I would have had to click that first, and then that opens up this qualification in the technical section. That's the buyer attachments there. And it's got the 13 different files, and it's got the mass download button here. So I won't go into these particularly, but it looks like lots of maps, and as you scroll down, all the different specifications. That's the messages. The These messages, actually I didn't say that, these will, once you've registered your interest, any messages at all will be circulated and it will come into your email as something from alert, auto alert, I think, at Bravo Solutions. So it looks a bit of an odd email address, but that's the ones to watch out for. Watch out during the tender process. Otherwise, you just need to keep going into the system and checking the messages. But even more important is actually using, when it comes to that request for documents and even the contract awards, all of that is going to come to you through this messaging system. You're not going to get an email direct to your email address from FLS. So we've had clients who've been awarded contracts and they didn't know because they ignored the emails coming through. They didn't think it was important. And it turned out to be an award letter and they hadn't responded to it. So that one's the reminder about today's events. And I can see in my sent messages, so I've got a couple here and it'll tell you when they're read and when they're replied to. So pretty straightforward. And you can also do draft messages and save them and send them later. But if I just go back onto ITTs and my response, very quickly on the qualification envelope, I'm going to make the text a wee bit bigger because it looks a bit small here. So here's my save buttons and save and exit. And then this is the qualification one. And you can see largely there's quite a lot of boxes with text in. And then there's others that you'll see as soon as it's a bot like this. I've used PCST before, so all of my details are automatically added in. However, you must absolutely check those and make sure that they're still correct, just in case some of the information's changed. Okay, so this is some of the participation ones. You know, are you subcontracting? And here you can see this is for a previous tender. I've had to upload SPDs for some of my subcontractors. But this is the kind of format. You're asked to tick here the lots that you wish to tender for. So I'm guessing you just choose up to 3 at that point. There's a kind of what they call the representative. So usually you'd put in the senior person in your company for that. And here is where you talk about whether you're going to subcontract. So this is all that part 2 information. I'm just going to move on just very quickly to, this is the exclusion grounds. And the format of the questions is, is it yes or no? So are you involved in conspiracy? Obviously say no. And at this point, now this is absolutely standard. This is any document available electronically. Largely for any of these part 3 questions, there isn't a national database of criminal offences or anything. So we recommend everyone just put in your no, but put in not applicable underneath that. And there is literally, as we go down here, pages and pages of these yes/no questions. Okay, there's some at the end that don't automatically fill, which I would have to go back and fill in. Okay, so I'm just going to get down to, so this is the start of the part 4 questions. I just wanted to quickly show you some examples of the guidance. So the first question, 4A, there's quite distinct guidance here in what you need to add into the box below. So operator's license, yes or no, test certificates and so on, weighing devices. So all of that, the recommendation is to cut and paste this text and add it into this document. So this part here, you would fill that in. Okay, and then the other boxes here. And I guess if there is a link to, I don't know, there might be a list of operators, you could put in a web link there if it's valid. Okay, so that's 4A. 4B is insurance. So either yes, you already have it, or no, you'll commit to obtain it. Like if you say no, you won't, then you're out, basically. And this is the 4C technical, where they ask about the different project examples. And again, there's very specific, so make sure you take account of exactly the instructions here, and that little black triangle there has the template, which you need to open up. I think it's just a straightforward Word document. You complete, and then you must attach that here. Don't put it in any other attachments area. Okay, so again, the requirement here for supply chain, not going to go through these in any detail. So again, this is one where you don't attach a document, you have to fit in all your answer in the 2000 characters. And there's a little box there, as you're typing, it'll tell you how many characters you've got left. Just to let you know, it says 2000, but you never ever get 2000 characters for some reason. And it includes the spaces as well. So be careful, don't leave this to the last minute. You need to make sure that you've got time to properly fill those in. This is the environmental one. Here's the one about number of employees, managerial staff. List of equipment, again, is a fill in the box, so unfortunately no pictures or anything allowed there. What's the proportion of your subcontracting? This was the one where I'd asked a question. I think Louise and Daniel, there's a question 4C12 that's in here that didn't seem to link to anything. And then 4D is where the questions are about health and safety. So either you have ISO 18001 or, and then there's a list of other questions. So if you can make sure that you've got documentation to provide later or text to answer those questions, then that still counts as a pass. Okay, and just ignore the fact that it talks about quality assurance because it's not, it's a standard wording on these questions here. Okay, and in the very bottom, once you've got through that, you put in, just type in to sign off on this one. Save and exit. And that's the qualification section. Technical will look very similar. Here, obviously, you're going to get, this is the scoring one. So, but you can see already here, there's quite detailed questions with lots of different sections on them and subsections. So this is where you absolutely must make sure that you answer each of these as fully as you can within the word limits. I can see here that's like 3 pages plus an additional page for each lot that you've bid for. And there's a font size given, saved in PDF format only. So all of that, and then you need to click to upload the file once you're done. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 questions then that I think are the scoring ones. And the evaluation methodology will be in the specification that tells you what the score is for each of these. But you can see, so this is 2 pages, so just be careful it's not the same pages for each one. Okay, and then some pass-fail questions at the end, which are obviously fill in the box at this stage as well. Okay, so it's a reasonably demanding tender, I would say. So this is where you need to be getting a proper bid plan together to make sure that all of these elements are properly covered. Okay, so I'll just very quickly open up the commercial one so you see the format of that one. So in order to do that, this is me still in the master ITT. If I click on the multi-lots, it has the master at the top, but if I just go down a little bit and click on lot 1, you'll see then, so technical is just where I have to answer a question, say yes, build and all the rest of it. And then commercial, you're having to actually fill in the prices here per ton. So I'm just going to put in an example. Here, if you put your price in, it doesn't automatically replicate. So you've got to, once you've filled it all in, click Save Changes. And then that should calculate your prices from there. And it obviously shows at the top as well. So if any of that isn't working, make sure that you get on to PCS tender just to check. But most of that looks as if it's working properly. Okay, and then this one is your open book pricing template. So that, again, if you click on that, that will open up your file for the, I'm presuming it may be an Excel spreadsheet that has to be filled in there. Okay, so commercial, again, you can save and exit. Come out of that. I could click submit response just now, but it wouldn't let me because I've not filled everything in. But I might click these three dots and have a look at the printable view. I would normally download it as a PDF, but it just shows you this kind of format, which is, it looks complicated, but to me it's quite good. You can actually start to see that you've filled everything in once you look at the various documents. Okay, so I think, sorry, there's a lot in that, but I think some of you will be reasonably familiar with PCS Tender already, but for those of you who aren't, you can use the slides, go step by step, but at any stage, if you see something you're not sure about, you'll be able to ask through the messaging system as well.